Last week, I promised to continue the discussion about the Foreigner class, which honestly has one of the weirdest concepts in the NASAverse. Well, calling it a discussion might be a stretch. It's more like sharing my observations. I didn't really dive into the trivia or the ins and outs of the class. Instead, I focused on their oddities and the unique details that make them stand out. So in this video, I want to dive into how weird the whole concept of the Foreigner class is, especially when you look at each member of the class. Foreigners are already full of craziness, but the different takes on what foreign means definitely make some of the servants in this class stand out even more to masters. Abigail Williams. Yeah, you've probably heard that name before. If you're into history, there's no way you don't know about Abby. In real life, she was just a kid who pointed fingers, started the Salem witch trials, and then poof, disappeared from the records. In FGO, Abby's got a direct connection to a Lovecraftian godlike being, similar to Yog-Sothoth. This is her outer god power. She taps into this entity's strength by summoning monsters and even using its tentacles. By her second ascension, her appearance gets a serious glow-up, or maybe more of a weird-up. Her color scheme shifts to purple, she's decked out in strange, inhuman clothing, and her overall vibe strays even further from anything resembling a regular human. I think this was the ideal concept for a foreigner early on, an unknown entity sneaking into our world, silently merging in through a little kid without anyone noticing. Now, I'm not gonna go over Abby's foreigner class in general. Abby's the first foreigner in FGO, and her gimmick is definitely unique. But there's another reason why her take on the foreign concept feels special to me. Now, back to what makes foreigners so unique. Beyond what I mentioned last time, like the eerie skin color changes, glowing blue eyes, inhuman appearances, and their signature no-shoes evolution for that eldritch horror aesthetic, there's something about Abby's design that people just never seem to notice. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but her design and overall vibe seem off in a way that feels deliberate. Like maybe they designed her this way to make it harder for players to pin down the timeline while diving into the Salem singularity. Or maybe that's just me spiraling into foreigner-level paranoia. Alright, look, Abigail's design is supposed to be in 1600 style, but a lot of her look doesn't really line up with the Salem time she's supposed to be from. First off, her normal outfit is packed with tied bows here and there, in various colors too. At first glance, it might seem cute for a kid. Nothing wrong with that. But it's totally out of place for the time period. In the 17th century, bows were purely functional, used for tying sashes, not as decorative elements or hair accessories. Then there's her dress. It's way shorter than anything a kid in Salem would have worn, even by the standards of that era. And don't even get me started on her hat. It's basically a bowler, which didn't appear until around 150 years later. On top of that, women wearing hats like that was pretty rare unless they were horseback riding. Most girls and women back then would have worn headscarves instead, just like the other characters in Salem. Again, her teddy bears. Yeah, those are a huge anachronism too. While soft toys technically existed back then, teddy bears specifically didn't show up until the early 1900s. But Abby's got them, and even shares them with Lavinia, which is adorable but historically way off. She also sings "Happy Birthday to You" if it's your birthday, which is cute as heck. But the song didn't even exist until the late 1800s, and it didn't blow up until the 20th century. You see? I love that because it feels like she's foreign, even from the perspective of the game's story. Hokusai, the legendary artist who had his own brush with the eldritch horror world of Cthulhu. Like other foreigners, when he levels up, his appearance shifts, his colors change, and the shoes come off for that signature cosmic aesthetic. This foreigner has a pretty unique way of keeping their sanity intact. How did Hokusai avoid becoming just another puppet for the outer gods? Simple. Art. He was just insanely focused on his craft. So, one of those gods, implied to be Cthulhu, made contact with him. likely through the crack in reality that Abi opened in Salem. The god wanted to use him as a vessel, but Hokusai was so obsessed with his sense of art that he just couldn't deal with the god's terrible aesthetic. Seriously, for him it was that bad. In the end, his unshakable focus on his own artistic vision was enough to keep his mind his own. This insane focus on art even shows up in gameplay. You see, Hokusai doesn't have the insanity passive skill that most foreigners do. Why? Because he didn't lose his mind. He channeled the madness into his creativity. And yeah, that same run-in with the Abyss Dwellers supposedly inspired him to create the Dream of the Fisherman's Wife. You know, the painting with a woman and a very enthusiastic octopus. Honestly, this is why I had to include Hokusai on this list. Out of all the foreigners, he doesn't stand out as much. But as a certified man of culture, I just gotta say, yep, that's the very first tentacle porn. And it's real. They actually made it. Koyanskaya is one of the most unique foreigners out there, with a concept that sets her apart from the rest. Instead of the usual outer god connection, her foreigner traits come from something totally different. She's a nature spirit born from the cries of animals during the Tunguska explosion. Basically, Koyanskaya's foreigner concept isn't about meeting some cosmic horror. She is the being tied to the Tunguska comet itself. It's pretty wild. Despite not having ties to an outer god, she still managed to tap into beast-level power. Now here's something unique about this foreigner. Aside from being the embodiment of the foreign object concept itself, Koyanskaya of Dark takes on the role of an evil counterpart to her light version, but with a twist. You'd expect her to inherit all of Koyanskaya of Light's negative traits, right? Like the usual positive versus negative, light versus dark trope, where darkness is always out to harm humanity. But this one flips the script. Thanks to the whole beast's weird morality about humanity, it's the opposite. Koyanskaya of Light flat out hates humanity, while Koyanskaya of Dark is completely head over heels for them. The concept of this foreigner is actually kinda similar to Kukulkan. You know, a foreign object arrives on Earth and manifests as a humanoid figure. Kukulkan, if you're familiar with history, is often seen as synonymous with Quetzalcoatl, also known as the Flying Serpent. In the Lostbelt, though, she takes on a different role. She's essentially the heart of ORT, the alien threat that attacked the America Lostbelt. More specifically, she was created from a fusion of the divine Fungi Mala and ORT's heart, which came together to form the Lostbelt's ruler. Then the Dinos, the dinosaur people, took it a step further by deifying her, which let her exist in a human form. And since ORT is basically an alien, she's not all that different from Koyanskaya in terms of being a foreign being. The key thing is, there's no contact with any outer god like the eldritch horror type. Well, that's what I said. But honestly, ORT itself could totally be compared to Yog-Sothoth, or any other cosmic horror entity. And, in my opinion, this is the purest concept of a foreigner. Usually, foreigners are beings who borrow power from some otherworldly monster, or maybe they're foreign entities that crash onto Earth, blend with humanity, and become some kind of humanoid foreign hybrid. But ORT, it's the definition of foreigner. No humanoid influence, no magic, no blessings, nothing. It just arrived, attacked, and stayed as a pure foreign entity until it earned the title of Grand Foreigner. To be honest, I haven't played Lostbelt 7 yet, since it's not available on NA. But I've kept up with the plot points, and I was shook when I found out ORT had a humanoid form, and was officially recognized as a Grand. Of course, I can't wrap up a video about foreigners without talking about our boy Voyager. This kid isn't just one of the weirdest foreigners, he might actually be one of the strangest heroic spirits in the entire NASA-verse. Voyager is a heroic spirit with a foreigner concept based on an object from outer space. Yep, an object. Not a creature, not a god, just a thing. What makes his concept so unique is the fact that he's literally the manifestation of a space probe. No conspiracy theories, no magical shenanigans. Just a simple probe launched into the great unknown. Earlier, we talked about how Koyanskaya came from the Tunguska explosion, in which the event itself is still wrapped in mystery, and how Kukulkan was born from ORT's heart, worshipped by the Danos. But Voyager? He's just a space probe that somehow ended up summoned in a Holy Grail war and manifested as a little boy. And fun fact, he's the youngest servant in the entire franchise when it comes to historical age. In real history, Voyager 1 launched in 1977 and is still active as of 2024. It's only expected to run out of power in 2025, which happens to be right around the timeline of Fate Requiem. That's also the reason why he appears as such a young child. He's still alive out there in space. Pretty wild, right? A literal piece of human technology turned into a servant, and he's out there doing his thing. Another unique thing about Voyager, aside from the whole space probe as a servant deal, is how he ties back to the first batch of foreigners. Remember how most foreigners shift into a half-monster form as they ascend, reflecting their connection to some outer being. They change color, their demeanor shifts, and some even start chanting in alien languages. In Voyager's case, though, he doesn't turn into a monster. I mean, makes sense, considering he has no ties to any outer being. Instead, his fighting style evolves to reflect his identity as a space probe. In his first and second stages, his attacks are playful and starry, almost childlike. Lots of flying around, sparkly effects, and whimsical patterns, very fitting for his little kid vibe. But in his third ascension, things get real. He shifts to close-range combat using space probe tools to attack enemies. He even starts hurling missiles and actual spacecraft at his foes. Man, you gotta love the creativity of the developers when it comes to exploring the concept of foreigners. What do you guys think? Which foreigner do you think stands out as the most unique?